Welcome back to our channel. Today I'm recording the very highly requested how to raise my child bilingual. You guys have asked me so many questions about how I am raising my toddler Lila bilingual. And if you're new to our channel, hi, my name is Priscilla and I am half of Follow the Hills with my husband Rian. I was born and raised in Brazil, so my mother tongue is Portuguese, but I live in the USA now. So I've lived in the US for many years. I first came here as an exchange student for a year. Then I fell in love with the country, the culture, and everything, and decided to come back for university. I graduated in New York City, where I met my husband, and my husband is American. After living together in New York City, we moved to Chicago where we got married, and eventually we moved back to Brazil for 2 years to go through infertility treatment, and that's where we had our daughter. So she is Brazilian born, and most recently we moved back to the US, first to Madison, Wisconsin, and we just now are settling in Door County, Wisconsin, which is up north. Very cold winters, but we love it so far. So with all that said, this is just a quick introduction to let you know why I am raising my child bilingual. Oh, and we also have another baby on the way. I am 31 weeks pregnant at the moment with a baby boy, and he's going to be here very soon, and I also plan to raise him bilingual like I am raising my daughter. It is super important to me that my kids speak and understand Portuguese fluently, because both of them will be raised in the US. So English will be their first language. They will go to a primarily English speaking school, and all of their friends are going to speak English, and I am the only person who they have to make sure that they learn another language from a young age. My husband does speak a little bit of Portuguese because, like I said, we lived in Brazil for 2 years together, and he took a lot of Portuguese lessons. And you know, just the fact that he lived in Brazil with my family and we're constantly speaking Portuguese around him, he picked up a lot of the language, but he doesn't consider himself fluent. In my opinion, in order for you to be fluent in a language, in a different language, you must be able to think in that language without translating the sentences in your head. For me, for example, when I first moved to the US, I spoke a little bit of English, but I wasn't nearly close to be fluent. So I still had, you know, that moment where I had to pause and think what I was going to say, and I would think it in Portuguese and then I would translate it in my head to English in order to communicate well with others. And of course, with years of living here, I've become fluent in English, and Portuguese is my first language, so I'm fluent in that as well. So with that, I hope that my kids will also grow up to be fluent in both languages. At this point, my toddler is only 17 months old, so she's not being alphabetized yet. She's not going to school yet. She is just learning language with her surroundings. So by hearing us speaking with her, by us reading to her, by us communicating with her in, you know, either English or Portuguese, and that's how toddlers and children pick up language in the first place. They do not learn a language, they do not have an emotional connection with a language by going to school and learning that language, you know, in that setting. They learn language within their household. So it is very important that for me, I speak with Lila, my toddler, in Portuguese 100% of the time. So sometimes it gets a little bit awkward because I live in a English speaking environment. Everybody around me speak English, and everybody around me speaking English with her. So my husband and I had to come up with a strategy from the moment she was born, so we could make sure that she also heard Portuguese at all times. And it's up to me you know, that she does, that she's constantly being spoken to in Portuguese. At the moment, I stay home with my daughter, so I am a stay-at-home mom at the moment. So I have a ton of time with her, and she sees me and speaks to me the most. So I am the person who communicates with Lila the most in her life at the moment, more than even Ryan, because Ryan works outside of the house and he's not talking to her, you know, like for 12 hours a day like I am. So at the moment she hears more Portuguese and she understands commands in Portuguese much more than she does in English. The way that we structure her communication in the house, in our household, is that I, like I said, speak Portuguese with her 100% of the time, and Ryan speaks English with her. So she understands and she makes an emotional connection from a young age that with mom, she speaks Portuguese. That's the language that mom speaks with her. And dad, she speaks English. So she speaks English with dad. This method, or this way of raising your child bilingual, is nothing more than, you know, raising your child if you're just raising them in one language. So if you have a toddler in your home, or if you have a child in your home and you're speaking English with that child will understand the language that, you know, you're speaking with her or him. So, you know, the reason that your toddler is fluent in the language that you speak is because you're communicating with him or her at all times. So this is the method that I'm introducing to Lila. Actually, after she was born, and you know, we were thinking about how we are going to raise her bilingual, what's the best method and everything, I watched this Brazilian vlogger who is Brazilian, now lives in Denver in Colorado, but she has 2 kids who were born in London. So she traveled a lot. Her name is Adriana, and she has a vlog called Dri Everywhere. I'll leave her YouTube channel linked down below, but all her vlogs are in Portuguese. So if you guys speak Portuguese, she's a great resource for also how to raise kids bilingual, because both of her kids are being raised bilingual, and she's my inspiration of like speaking Portuguese with my kids 100% of the time. And how she explains it is that, again, her kids have made a connection, an emotional connection with Portuguese, with that language, because that's the language that mom speaks. So at this point, they are being raised in the U.S., but they also grew up in London because that's where they were born. So both countries, you know, English-speaking countries, and her husband is American as well. So at this point, her kids are so funny. They will speak Portuguese with her and English with dad, and you see in their vlogs how the kids interact. Sometimes the kids will throw like if they're speaking to her in Portuguese, they'll throw a English word in the middle. She'll respond to them in a very kind way, repeating what they said but in Portuguese. So that kind of ingrains the language, her language, into the child's mind. So this is the method that she's been using, and it has worked for her. Yeah, so, and that's the same thing that I'm doing. Other things that I do to, of course, assist with the process of having Lila picking up Portuguese is that I read books for her in Portuguese. I have a few books. Her favorite books actually are in Portuguese, so I read them for her in Portuguese, and then a little, you know, some certain books that have like little photos, or it's just like the word books that like you train with toddlers, I will say that word in Portuguese as well, and then Ryan comes and says in English. So she knows that the word in Portuguese and the word in English. And another thing that we do a lot is that I have, you know, family in Brazil. My family is all in Brazil, so I FaceTime with my mom especially all the time. So she is familiar with her family in Brazil speaking Portuguese with her when she's on the phone. So I refer to, for example, my mom is vovó to Lila. She's never grandma, she's always vovó, which is grandma in Portuguese. And then Ryan's mom, she is grandma to Lila. So she knows the difference. she kind of like makes this, again, emotional connection with each word and each language, you know, with separate members of the family. Okay, I also asked you guys to send me questions on Instagram because I think that would be the easiest way to go through your questions and your doubts of how I am raising my child bilingual. I know that lots of you have either interest in raising your child bilingual or you're curious about it. So if you don't follow us on Instagram, go ahead and follow us on @followthehills, because that's where I get all my questions from for videos like this. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started with your questions. The first question is, do you guys do the mom speaks Portuguese and dad speaks English, I guess, situation? Love you guys, thank you so much. Yes, that's what I just explained how we do it. I speak Portuguese with Lila 100% of the time, and Ryan speaks English with her. Do you use any apps, cards, or books? If so, what do you recommend? I do use books. At this point, that's what she's interested in. I think I will use apps in the future. She's still not super interested in apps. If she is like looking at the phone or the iPad, she just wants to watch cartoons. Oh, that's another thing that I do. I put cartoons in Portuguese, like with music, those little educational musical cartoons. I play for her in Portuguese, so she's constantly listening to the language. But yeah, I can't recommend, you know, any particular books, but the one that I use are those little, you know, word books. So my first words, so I have those in English and I have those in Portuguese, and then she looks at the pictures and she's really interested in a certain picture, she'll point it and I'll say the name of that thing in Portuguese. How do you handle making sure she learns your language? I don't think I stress about it at this point. She's too young. I just speak to her in Portuguese, so she picks it up. But I don't think that I will be, you know, like if she doesn't, I don't know, if she grows up to not speak Portuguese with me all the time, I think I'll deal with it when that time comes. But at this point, when she's so young, you know, I just speak Portuguese with her. Does Lila know whom to speak Portuguese or English? She knows that I speak Portuguese with her, and that's the language that she understands the most. She's still not speaking so much back, but if she does, you know, she will just probably speak the word that she knows how to say or that she associates with it, which is usually in Portuguese, because I will, like, for example, if she wants agua, water, she'll say ga, and then I know that is agua, ga for agua, and Ryan knows as well, and then eventually she will learn also water, and she will know, she won't need to be taught that that's water and agua. She would just, our brains just pick it up, and that's how we learn language. This question is in Portuguese, so I'll read in Portuguese and then I'll translate it down below. Laila tem preferência por algum dos dois idiomas? Você percebe algo nesse sentido? Yes, so she has preference. Because she hears Portuguese more at this point in her life, she understands more commands in Portuguese. So I think at this point she leans towards Portuguese, but eventually I have a feeling that she's gonna lean towards English just because she's going to be raised in the US. Somebody asks, my husband is Ukrainian. We have chosen to raise our child English only as we felt that you would put a barrier between me and the baby. Do you feel this way at all with Ryan? No, because Ryan is also very interested in Brazilian culture, so he took the time to learn Portuguese as well. So he will never, I don't think he'll ever feel left out if I'm speaking Portuguese with Lila and she's speaking Portuguese back with me, because he understands pretty much everything. So he won't feel left out. I doubt it. He wants to learn more Portuguese. I think it will actually be helpful to him to have his daughter being, you know, talking Portuguese with him as well. And I speak Portuguese with Brian sometimes. Like, I'll, you know, just throw a sentence here and there, mostly English of course, but I try to constantly kind of make him kind of like have his Portuguese not die in his brain. Did you notice a delay in speech? She is completely normal in her development, her speech development at this point, because she speaks like a good amount of words. I don't even know, maybe 15, 20 at this point. She will say little, little words. So it's completely normal for where she is at 17 months. But I noticed that there are other children that perhaps can speak more words than she can at the same developmental age. I think there will be a little delay in her speech. It's just expected for kids who grow up bilingual. But honestly, I'm not worried about it because I know that she will catch up, she'll pick it up. I think it will be more beneficial to her looking into the future to have her understand and speak Portuguese and English rather than not teach her, so then she won't have a delay in speech at this point, because she will catch up. Kids catch up. Bilingual kids always grow up to catch up. Also, I think teaching her Portuguese will open up her to learn other romantic languages, because for example, Portuguese and Spanish are very similar, Portuguese and Italian are very similar, you name it. French will be easier for her to learn just because she has that base. So just to summarize, I do think that she'll have a little delay in speech. I expect it, maybe not, maybe she'll be fine, but I expect it just because it's what people tell you to expect, but I'm not worried about it. Is Lila getting confused with her parents speaking two different languages? No, she doesn't seem confused at all. I think it's what I said before. Kids don't, the brain of a child is just ready to learn at this point. So they're not, like our brains, for example, for us to learn another language at this point in our development, we have to sit down and consciously learn it, where she's just learning unconsciously. So she is picking up all the words and the cadence and the verbiage and everything just because her brain is able to absorb all that without her having to study, if that's what I mean, if that makes sense. So it's not confusing to her, it's just what it is. Like, it's like I said, water is agua for her, but it's also water for her. She doesn't have to go there and learn that. It's just part of her recognition. This is a very interesting question. What do you find is the hardest going between the two languages? To me, I think it's to make sure that I'm speaking English with her 100% of the time, even if we are in a social environment. Like, I think being in a social environment sometimes, it's hard because I don't want to exclude some people, who are around us, or like friends and family and whatnot, but I always have to remind myself that it's more important that I sacrifice that little moment speaking Portuguese with her than to cave, I guess. To cave and just speak English with her because it's socially what other people are doing. If other people are curious what I'm doing, what I've found so far is that most people are quite like accepting and impressed of what it is that we're doing. If they ask me, what language is that you're speaking with her? And then I say, well, I speak Portuguese with her because I want her to grow up knowing the language, and they're like, wow, that's awesome. And they don't feel so left out if you just explain your situation. Same with family. How is your bilingual routine? There's no routine, I just speak Portuguese with her. From the moment she wakes up to the moment she goes to bed, she just hears me speaking Portuguese. Does Ryan ever get confused by what Lila is saying to him if she's not talking English? No, because he understands Portuguese a lot of the time and he knows what she means. At this point, her speech is just starting. For example, like I said with the example of the water, like she says ga for water, she says da for give me, because da is the verb to give, it's da in Portuguese. So she goes like, she wants something, she will point and she'll be like da, 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 but she can't form a sentence. She's 17 months old, so she can't say like, give me the water. She'll be like da, da, and she'll point at it, and then I'll say agua, and then she go ga, ga. So this is how she speaks at the moment. She's still starting her speech process. So with that, Ryan understands what she wants. Do you speak Portuguese when Ryan is around? Yes, I speak Portuguese with her all the time, regardless if Ryan is around or not. And I speak Portuguese sometimes with Ryan as well. So he he understands a lot of Portuguese. How do you go about teaching a second language to your child if your significant other isn't bilingual? I think it's a conversation that you have to have prior to either having children or your children being born, because it's something that will kind of define your family dynamic. At this point, like I said, I speak Portuguese with Lila, Ryan speaks English. So this is our family dynamic and we're completely okay with it. I think it's a conversation that you have to have. It helps if your significant other is interested in your language as well. Like for example, I'm very lucky that Ryan is interested in Portuguese, that he's lived in Brazil, he knows the culture well, he studied the language. So for us, our dynamic is not so foreign for him. So I think it's a conversation. Again, like, you know, just sit down, have a conversation with your partner, and if they are on board, awesome. If they're not, and you still want to speak your mother tongue or a language that you want your child to learn, just, you know, continue talking, make your research, present facts, I guess, you know, show them why, kind of like make an argument as to why it will be beneficial for your child to learn another language, which in my opinion always is. So yeah, conversation. Do you think it's confusing for them to learn both at the same time or easier? I think it's easier. Coming from a past that I learned, you know, nowadays I consider myself bilingual because I'm fluent in English and in Portuguese, but for example, English is my second language. I mean, you guys can hear, even though I think I speak English well enough, but you can hear that I do have an accent. I wasn't born and raised in America, so English is my second language. It was harder for me to learn English as an older child or as an adult than you would have been if by any chance I was brought up in a bilingual environment, because it goes back to like when you're a child, you're absorbing everything around you and you're literally a sponge learning everything that is around you. Another thing that is helpful is that the muscles in your facial muscles, the muscles in your mouth are not 100% formed yet as you're a child, as you're young. So it's easier for a very young child to be able to make perfect sounding words in a different language if they're learning from a young age, because they're training their muscles to make that word or to make those sounds. For example, in Portuguese, we don't have the rolled R's that English has. So, rah, rah, rah. So some words for me, for example, are harder for me to pronounce perfectly. And the same for you if you're an English speaker and you're trying to learn a second language. I'm sure it will be harder for you to make specific sounds. In Portuguese, for example, we have the sound ra, or ya, or nha, or all these sounds are harder for an English speaker person to make when they're older and they're learning the language. I know that because it's hard for Ryan. So I think that she'll be able to grow up speaking both languages and pronouncing the words fluently. So that's a good thing. And the last question is not a question, I just want to read it because I thought it was pretty good and encouraging. No question, but a big applause to you. Best decision ever. I was raised trilingual and I'm so thankful today. So one of you guys sent this message, and thank you so much for the encouragement. I think that raising Lila and baby boy bilingual will be a benefit for them in the future. It's something that I really hope they understand that it's for their own benefit, and you know, hopefully they will grow up speaking Portuguese fluently, English fluently, and choosing to learn other languages. I think knowing a different language, knowing a second, a third language is such a special skill that one can have, because it opens up your mind for, you know, for communicating with other cultures, understanding other cultures from a very deep level. And there's really nothing better than being connected and feeling connected in this global environment that we live in today. So I hope you guys liked this video. I hope it was helpful to you. I obviously don't have all the answers for everything. I'm just a mom. I'm not a specialist or anything. I'm just trying to do my best for my kids. But if it helped you, if you liked it, give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below with tips and tricks, what you do to raise your child bilingual, or questions and whatnot. And subscribe if you haven't yet. And I'll see you guys in our next video. Bye!